This is session 6, Language and Identity, and it's a session closely linked to the previous one on language ideologies and language attitudes. You'll see that there's a little bit of overlap between both sessions, but of course we'll introduce new topics and new issues in this session. First of all, definition. Both terms are quite complex. As you know, language is difficult to define. It's not easy to determine what a language is. And as you can imagine, for identity, that's also a big term, which is a little bit elusive. But scholars have pointed out that we can define identity as the way we conceive ourselves as individuals or as members of groups. That's the definition given by John Edwards. So the point here is to highlight that it's both an individual, how you feel, who you are, but also a social phenomenon, a collective, a groupal phenomenon. Two main facets, two main aspects of language. We're all learning languages here at the School of Modern Languages, and of course we focus on the communicative, the instrumental view of language, the instrumental side of languages. You're studying Spanish, Chinese, French, etc., because you want to use those languages as tools to communicate with other people. But very important for this module, and as you know, for many people who speak different languages, language has also a symbolic value. It can be or it can become an identity badge, a sense of belonging or to a specific community, depending on the language that you speak. So in the literature, differences in language as the human capacity to speak, and languages fulfill a function. That's what scholars have studied, and that function is marking social belonging. So it is not a coincidence that there are so many differences in languages, and even within languages. For example, in terms of accent and dialects, etc. Language is not the only identity badge for a social group, as you know. There are other important markers of social belonging. Race is an obvious one, religion as well. But the thing with language, the language is quite singular in the way that it's cumulative and can be inclusive. That doesn't happen with race or religion. You can speak 2, 3, 4 languages. You can kind of feel that you belong to different communities because you speak other languages. But normally speaking, people do not have 2 religions or 2 races. Going back to something we've said in previous sessions, and I want to highlight this again because this is important to understand language policy and planning in Europe and beyond. There are historical links between territory, identity, and language. Remember that this comes from the Romantic period of the 19th century, particularly in Germany, with German philosophers, and one nation, one language, one people. That triad still has a lot of weight in European thinking and policy making in current times. So language and identity is embedded in nationalist ideologies and processes of nation building. That's why we think of the language French as a core element in nation building in France, or German in Germany, Italian in Italy, Spanish in Spain, etc. That outlook on language and identity may seem a little bit essentialist in the sense that we reify and we objectify language and identity. And there's a postmodern critique of sociologists, anthropologists, and other scholars against the background of what we're living in the last few decades of globalization, super diversity, particularly in big cities, and migration. And the focus now is more on fluid and hybrid, situational and contextual performance of identity. So identity is more related to identification in different moments in life and spaces and contexts. So this view is really against static views of identity, and they do problematize, if you like, the direct link that sometimes we assume between language and identity. And we'll see some examples in the case of Spain later, how these things evolve with language, with time. This is also connected to the study of common phenomena when people speak. It's not that we speak just one language as a thing, but what is very common among many people around the world, as you know, is going back and forth between languages, mixing languages, and for those phenomena we have different terms like code switching, for example, code crossing, translanguaging is gaining ground now also in sociolinguistics. These phenomena are trying to explain the ways in which people speak when more than one language is in use. Remember the idea of linguistic repertoires as well. We'll go back to that in a minute. What is ethno-linguistic identity? There's also many studies on that look at the link between language and ethnic identity. And ethnic identity has been defined both as a socio-psychological emotive state, again, is how you feel as a person, how you feel within your social group, but also it is produced and negotiated in interactions with others. So the idea here also is that you cannot understand your identity without the interaction between groups and boundaries. That's also an important idea. Languages and other social markers of identity are often used as boundaries, as markers of who you are, but also the ways in which you do not belong to other groups, or you are different from other groups. What makes you different as a person, but also as a group. A language, as I said before, often becomes a symbol of ethnic identity par excellence. It's not always the case. It can be a religion, as we said before, or the cultural traits. But often it is language that people cling to claim a differentiated identity, if you like. That is the case, for example, in Spain, for Catalonia and the Basque Country particularly. There's the Giles model of ethno-linguistic vitality, and this model considers ethno-linguistic vitality an important marker of ethnic identity, and it takes into account the status of the language, the demographic strength, and the institutional support. So as you can see, this is related also to language policies and revitalization. How regions or nations implement their language policies. Ofelia Garcia also says that a strong ethno-linguistic identity is a necessary condition, a prerequisite for language policies to support the efforts of an ethnic community that performs its identity languaging in certain ways. So she came up with a kind of a graded scale that we're going to see in a minute, and you'll see the links between that ethno-linguistic identity and language policy and processes of language recovery, which are so important to understand the situation of regional minoritized languages in Spain, for example. So this is the table by Ofelia Garcia, and as you can see on the left-hand side, you have successful language policy efforts, and those include different variables. For example, ethno-linguistic identity, if it's strong, that it's positive. The beliefs about languaging, about using languages, in private, in public, how language is managed, and by the in-group and also by the out-group, because as you know, minorities usually form part of bigger political units. That is the case for Luxembourgish, for example, but also the case that the case that concerns us, which is Basques and Catalans. So in Basque Country, and Catalan would belong to this first group, where you have language maintenance and development. So she's quite optimistic in that way, if you include those variables. Then you have, as we move to the right-hand side of the table, you'll see that some of these variables then are moderate or even weak, and then you have less successful language policy efforts to revitalize those languages. And the linguistic groups that you have here are Maoris in New Zealand, as you know, we have Welsh here in the UK, and even less successful, for example, you have Tzeltals and Tzotzils in Mexico, indigenous languages of Latin America, Amazigh speakers in Northern Africa, for example, Alsatian in the border between France and Germany, and even less successful. And you have other case studies and other cases like Breton and Gallo speakers in France, Diné in North America, etc. You can see the processes from language maintenance to language revitalization to languages in danger to language shift and language loss of different groups. So what happens in Spain? As we've said before, and as this is one key idea that I wanted to take home with you, from not just from this session, but also from this whole module. And the idea is that a language can be and has been a main emblem, a main badge of collective identity in Catalonia, for example. The Catalan language I'm referring to, of course, the own language. And that is the case also of the Basque Country. So that's why we have that lengua propia, that idea of lengua propia. So there's a strong link between speaking Catalan and feeling Catalan, the collective identity of Catalans. And the same thing for the Basque Country. You can even find a rejection of that dual identity of people saying that they do feel Catalan or Basque and they do not feel Spanish. Of course, you can also meet people who feel both, and they have quite happy with their dual identity. And of course, some people who, even though they live or speak Catalan, and they live in Catalonia, speak Catalan, or the same with Basque Country, that they feel Spanish, or more Spanish than Basque or Catalan even. That is quite different from other regions in Spain, which have their own regional languages, minoritized languages, as we've seen in previous sessions. One region is Galicia and the other region is Valencia, and that has to do with political and historical reasons. And one of the political reasons is the lack of strong nationalist movements in the past in those two regions, unlike the Basque Country and Catalonia. So there seems to be also a strong link between language and nation building, and those processes have been much more successful, as you know, in Catalonia and the Basque Country, and not in other regions of Spain. Also, and this is important to understand the past and the present, and a little bit of what's the future, what's going on with identity and language in Spain. In the case of Catalonia, for example, bilingualism and beyond bilingualism, plurilingualism, which is the term we use for people who speak more than one language, more than two languages. This plurilingualism, which you can increasingly find in Catalonia, particularly among young people, this plurilingualism is indexing a desired cosmopolitan identity. So young people are ever more feeling cosmopolitan, if you like, due to their linguistic repertoire. So it's not now a question of a dichotomy between Spanish and Catalan, but rather looking at the different languages and varieties of the languages of language that people speak in Spain. We're referring now to Catalonia, particularly young people. But this is important. Catalan is becoming increasingly anonymous, so it's not ethnically marked anymore, if you like. There is a process of de-ethnicization of Catalan. It's just one more language, again, among the linguistic repertoire, particularly among the youth. That's what I'm trying to stress here. And some scholars have pointed out that Catalan can no longer operate as a practical index of a specific group belonging. So speaking Catalan does not necessarily mean that you feel Catalan. It may just be a question of personal preference, rather than just a statement of group belonging. That's very important. So language policies in Catalonia, as coming from institutions, from official institutions, from the regional government, have traditionally had an essentialist kind of outlook, and these policies may fail if plurilingualism and language diversity is not considered, which is the normal situation now in Catalonia, and particularly big cities where you have immigrants speaking different languages, a lot of people speaking English, a lot of people speaking Spanish and Catalan. So the situation has become more complex, again, beyond that dichotomy in previous decades, where you could only have more or less like Spanish and Catalan. It's much more complex than that now. And that's basically what I wanted to say for this session. We'll discuss more of this when you read all the papers and the literature on language and identity that you have on Canvas. Hasta pronto.